Hello, my name is David Gilbert. I am choir director of the Dansville Presbyterian Church, and you're listening to Volume 2 of the Singing Bible, a musical journey through the Scriptures. For every book of the Bible, you will be hearing a piece inspired by a portion of the Scriptures as sung by the Dansville Presbyterian Church Choir. In most cases, you will be hearing excerpts from actual Sunday morning services, along with brief introductory monologues by myself. Volume 1 began with the book of Genesis and ran through the book of Ezra. As we begin Volume 2, we take up with the book of Nehemiah. It's difficult to imagine what the world might be like today if King Artaxerxes I of the Persian Empire hadn't been so fond of his butler. According to the Bible, the king and his wife were eating a meal. One of his servants was pouring the wine, and the king couldn't help noticing how down in the mouth that servant was feeling. When asked, the servant replied that his people were having some trouble back home rebuilding their home, and that they were having trouble with the neighbors. The king offered to allow the servant to go back home and take charge of matters, and that servant did just that. The catch is that servant was Nehemiah, and the folks back home was the nation of the Hebrews. And the task that he oversaw was the rebuilding of Jerusalem, both the walls and the temple. In addition, Nehemiah also re-established the primacy of the Hebrew laws, especially the Torah. It was about this time that the Bible actually became Holy Scripture, as opposed to just a series of writings. In short, what Nehemiah did was to ensure the survival of the Hebrew culture. The Jews had been conquered by the Babylonians a couple of generations ago, and in such cases a conquered people tend to blend in with the culture of the conquerors. It would happen to all of Israel's neighbors, to the Philistines, the Ammonites, the Amalekites, the Moabites. But it was due very largely to the effort of Nehemiah that it did not happen to the Israelites. What he did was perhaps as important as anything that Moses or David or Solomon accomplished, although Nehemiah perhaps hasn't gotten as much press as he should. The book of Nehemiah tells the story of this portion of the history of Israel, and once again the musical inclinations of the chronicler come forth as the narrative is interrupted halfway through the story by a psalm that begins, "Stand up and bless the Lord your God forever and ever. Blessed be your glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise." And now here's a song based on that opening line. The Singing Bible, Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 5.
Lord your God with Martin Luther once said that he wished that it did not exist. And well over 1,000 years before he was born, a lot of other people were saying much the same thing about the book of Esther. Among hardline biblical scholars, it is one of the least liked books of the Bible. And when a group of Jewish rabbis got together in the 2nd century A.D. to decide once and for all what books belonged in the Bible, Esther was one of the main subjects of controversy. The anti-Esther camp had a lot of arguments on its side. First, they didn't think that Esther was old enough. The book may have been written as late as 125 BC, which would make it several centuries younger than most of the rest of the Old Testament. Also, there was some question as to the authorship of Esther. It was widely believed then that the book was written by a woman. And we couldn't have one of those in the Bible, could we? But the main bone of contention against Esther was that it was just too secular. It's a terrific read, one of the most suspenseful narratives in the Bible. But is it Holy Scripture? There is no lyrical poetry in Esther. There are no laws or commandments from God. There are no miracles from God. There is no God in Esther. The Lord is not mentioned by name anywhere in the book, nor does anyone do any praying to him. There is some fasting, but that's as close as it gets. In the end, a kind of compromise solution was reached, spurred on mainly by the fact that Esther was just so tremendously popular that there would have been a great hue and cry had it not been included in the Bible. And so it was, for the most part. Certain portions of the book, which were believed to have been written much later than the main text, were excised, and they can be found in the Apocrypha as the additions to Esther. The song you're about to hear is loosely based on the part of the book where Queen Esther's cousin and surrogate father, Mordecai, is attempting to persuade her to use her royal influence to try and prevent the annihilation of her people. And in doing so, he says to her, "For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" The Singing Bible, Esther chapter 4, verse 14.
It is God
books in the Bible, which one is the best? That may be something of a fatuous question, but it has been asked and answered many times in the past. And the general consensus is that of the books in the Bible, the one that best qualifies as a literary masterpiece is the book of Job. Lord Tennyson called it the best poem of ancient or modern times. And in terms of interpretation, it may be one of the most discussed books of the Bible. But for all the attention it has received, we know very little about where it came from. Trying to date the book has proven to be difficult because it's been through the editorial meat grinder. There have been many changes in it, revisions, additions. Some even think that the last chapter of the book, where the Lord restores Job to his original state of wealth and prosperity, is not original to the piece, that it was added on to provide the happy ending that the book originally did not have. Nobody knows who wrote the book of Job. It has been speculated that whoever it was, he must have been very worldly and very well traveled. He has an extensive knowledge of geography and of mythology and of nature. And one can't help but speculate if a person who writes so eloquently and poignantly about human suffering has perhaps had more than his fair share himself. Toward the end of the book, after Job, not showing his characteristic patience, has complained at length about the bad breaks he's had, the Lord responds with his famous speech that begins, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth?" And the familiar hymn you're about to hear was inspired by part of that speech. The Singing Bible, Job chapter 38, verses 8 through 11.
The restless wave, who
Of all the books in the Bible to try to summarize in 2 minutes, Psalms would have to be the most difficult, but try I shall. There are 150 Psalms. It is the longest book in the Bible. Isaiah, with 66 chapters, runs a distant second. Both the longest and the shortest chapters in the Bible are found in Psalms. Psalm 117, a mere 2 verses in length, while Psalm 119 is a whopping 176 verses long. In fact, in its original Hebrew version, Psalm 119 was an acrostic, a word puzzle. It was separated into 22 stanzas, each representing a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and each line of a stanza would begin with the appropriate letter. Nobody knows who wrote any of the Psalms. Traditionally, some of them are attributed to King David, but most modern scholars discount that, although some of them may date back to the time of King David. The Psalms were written over a period of some 600 to 700 years, between the 10th and the 4th centuries BC. They were collected into small groups, and then the small collections accumulated into one large body of work. The Psalter, as we know it, was finalized sometime around the 2nd century BC. As a result of this collection process, a certain amount of duplication resulted, some of it quite blatant. If you read Psalm number 14 and then turn to number 53, you'll find yourself reading word for word almost exactly the same thing. The Psalms are, of course, for the most part, songs meant to be sung. And more church music has been inspired by the Psalms than perhaps all of the rest of the Bible put together. And this morning the choir has chosen 2 songs to represent the Psalms. A little later you'll be hearing Robert Dwelly's musical interpretation of the 40th Psalm. But right now here is a familiar anthem based on what may be the best known passage in all the scriptures. The Singing Bible, Psalm 23. The very first verse of the book of Proverbs gives credit to King Solomon as its author. Most modern biblical experts would not agree with that, but many would agree that if it hadn't been for King Solomon, there wouldn't be a book of Proverbs. Proverbs is an example of what scholars call wisdom literature, a style which goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, but which didn't really catch on in Israel until King Solomon became its patron and sponsor. And so in his court in Jerusalem, there would be a number of wise men, sages, whose job it would be to instruct the young Jewish upper-class males on the proper way to get along in life. And one of the ways they did this was with the proverb, or the mashal, as it's called in Hebrew, a little two-line aphorism, very short, very easily memorized, that gives nuggets of information on how to better oneself, how to get along with people, how to find the ideal wife, how to avoid sin, and so forth. And so for several centuries, these sages would be part of the establishment in the courts of Jerusalem, much to the consternation of the radical left wing, that is to say, the prophets. The prophets, of course, always trying to catch the ear of the king of Israel, weren't very fond of these sages coming along and stealing some of their thunder. They also disagreed with some of the basic philosophies of the sages. The prophets thought that they concentrated too much on pragmatic and worldly things and not enough on God. And indeed, although God's name is not entirely absent from the book of Proverbs, as it is, say, in the book of Esther, his name doesn't come up very often. One of the instances in which it does forms the basis for the following anthem. The Singing Bible, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3, 4, 5, and 13.
Trust in the Lord.
Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Right from the outset, you realize that the book of Ecclesiastes is not going to have the same kind of optimistic tone as had the preceding book, the book of Proverbs. And yet both of these books are representatives of the wisdom movement. The difference lies in history. Proverbs, at least some of it, was written before that great low point in the history of the Israelite nation, the Babylonian exile. And Ecclesiastes was written sometimes afterwards. The author of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, as the King James Bible calls him, strove to look for the meaning of life and came up empty-handed. There was just too much sorrow and evil in the world for any easy answers to come to his hands. He recognized the value of wisdom, as was preached in the Proverbs, but he couldn't see that that alone was going to give life any meaning. And in the end, his basic theme is rather similar to that of the book of Job, that of the incomprehensibility of the ways of God, and that one must accept the little pleasures of life as God provides them for us. There is much of a fatalistic nature in Ecclesiastes. A sense of inevitability reigns throughout the book, as evidenced by what is perhaps the most famous passage in the book. And if you are an aficionado of 1960s rock and roll, you will recognize these words from the hit song Turn, Turn, Turn. Perhaps one of the few instances where the Bible is quoted directly in a rock and roll hit. Here's another version of that passage, the Singing Bible, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8.
All
As we turn another page in the Singing Bible, we find ourselves up to a book which has been the subject of numerous controversies, the least of which involving the book's name. In the King James Bible, it's called Song of Solomon, but there is no evidence that links it to Solomon. The book can only be traced as far back as the 5th century BC, whereas Solomon lived in the 10th. Most modern Bibles refer to the book as Song of Songs, although the Roman Catholics, just to be contrary, refer to it as Canticle of Canticles. At face value, Song of Songs is a collection of love poems. One could even call it erotic poetry. And through history, there have been people more than willing to take it at face value. One of the book's earliest and staunchest defenders was a rabbi from the 2nd century A.D. named Akiba. He argued in favor of including the song in the Holy Scriptures, and the thrust of his argument was that for the sake of completeness, the Bible should contain references to all forms of love, physical as well as spiritual. For those who were unhappy with the literal interpretation, there were a number of other routes to take. Some have argued that the song is actually a kind of dramatic dialogue with several speaking parts. This would be most extraordinary, as there is no other evidence that the ancient Hebrews were familiar with drama as an art form. A more plausible theory holds that the song was originally a group of Old Hebrew wedding songs. And then there are those who preferred to take the allegorical approach, saying that the song actually represents God's love for his chosen people, or in the case of Christians, Christ's love for the church. When reading the various excerpts describing the beauty of the female anatomy, one might wonder whether this takes a metaphor beyond reasonable limits. However, the metaphorical approach has always been a popular one, and now here's a song that makes use of just such a metaphor. The Singing Bible, Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 4.
Says
We were first introduced to the prophet Isaiah back in the book of 2 Kings, where he was acting as advisor to King Hezekiah of Judah. The kingdom of Israel had long since been split into two, and at this time the Assyrians had just conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and were threatening to do the same to the southern kingdom of Judah. And Isaiah's advice to His Majesty was to let the Lord take care of things. He will see you through this time of crisis. And indeed he did, and Judah held for a couple more centuries. This story is related in the book of Isaiah, but there is much more in that large 66 chapter book. In fact, it covers a period of history that far outdoes Isaiah's own life. It covers the period after the conquest of Israel, all the way up to the conquest of Judah at the hands of the Babylonians, and then the subsequent restoration of Israel by the Persians at the end of the 6th century BC. The book of Isaiah was more or less reached its present form around the 4th century BC. There were a lot of contributors to the book, and it's a very eclectic book. A wide variety of styles can be found in Isaiah. There's straightforward historical narrative like you'd find in 2 Kings. There are a number of psalm-like songs as well. And as you might expect from a book named after a prophet, there are a lot of prophecies. There are prophecies of doom as well as prophecies of hope. And most importantly for Christians, there are the first overtly messianic prophecies to be found in the Old Testament. There are also a number of prayers in Isaiah, and the song you're about to hear is based on a portion of one of those prayers. The Singing Bible, Isaiah chapter 33, verses 5, 9, and 10.
For he will
He ruffled a lot of feathers, made some enemies in high places, got thrown in prison at one point. Then he disappeared amid rumors of foul play. He's the Jimmy Hoffa of the Bible, the prophet Jeremiah. He lived at the end of the 7th century BC during the reign of King Zedekiah of Judah, the last of the Judean kings. And the reason he got in trouble was that he prophesied that Zedekiah would be the last of the Judean kings. He said that the Babylonians would conquer the remaining Israelite nation. And in the end, he was proven right, although that didn't stop him from being thrown in the stocks at one point. His final fate is unknown. He may have simply retired after the Babylonian conquest, his major prophecy having come true after all. Others say he may have been kidnapped and taken to Egypt. At any rate, he disappeared, and nobody really knows what happened to him. The book of Jeremiah consists largely of Jeremiah's own statements as dictated to his scribe Baruch. And among the things he says is one of his laments about the fate of Israel, in which he says, "Is there no balm in Gilead?" Gilead being a region in what is now the country of Jordan, in which there grew certain trees whose resin was used to make a medicinal ointment, henceforth looking toward Gilead for a balm. The Singing Bible, Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 22.
Sing
Our musical perusal of the scriptures continues now with the book of Lamentations. The King James Bible calls it the Lamentations of Jeremiah, but as we have already so often seen, such claims of authorship do not have any real confirmation in fact. Lamentations is a collection of 5 poems expressing sorrow and grief over the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in the year 586 BC. Included also prayers of confession of sin and of entreaties toward mercy from God. Each of the poems is separated into 22 little mini sections. The poems are, in fact, acrostics, each section beginning with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And there may have been 2 reasons for this. One as an aid to memorization, and 2 as a representation of the completeness of the plight of the Hebrews, saying in effect, our troubles run the gamut from A to Z, or to use the Hebrew alphabet, from Aleph to Toph. The poems are about the same age as the subsequent Babylonian exile about which we've talked so often. The Hebrews still use these poems on the anniversary of that dreaded day. Christians have more or less co-opted the poems as a reflection of the passion and death of Jesus Christ. The Singing Bible, Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23.
Changes
The Bible isn't very good about giving specific dates to specific events, but there is one notable exception, at least. In the very beginning of the book that bears his name, the prophet Ezekiel declared that it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. If the scholars have that correctly interpreted, that means that we know that Ezekiel became a prophet of God on the 31st of July in the year 593 BC. Ezekiel lived during the final years of the kingdom of Judah. He was a contemporary of the prophet Jeremiah. And basically he gave, at first, the same prophecies that Jeremiah did about the upcoming fall of the kingdom of Judah. But his style of prophecy was a far cry from the comparatively straightforward shoot from the hip style of Jeremiah. Ezekiel gave, as he said himself, visions of God. And some of them were rife with symbolism. There's the famous vision of the chariot throne of God, borne aloft in a whirlwind by the 4 cherubim, the winged man, the winged lion, the winged bull, and the winged eagle, symbols which Christians later used, as you can see at the window and back, for the writers of the 4 Gospels. And we also find in the book of Ezekiel the earliest examples of what we now call apocalyptic scripture, with his references to the mysterious conqueror Gog of Magog. But most importantly to the people of Israel were the prophecies that he gave after the conquest, the prophecies he gave while much of the Jewish nation, including himself, was in exile. He prophesied that this was not the end of the Jewish nation, that it would be reunited. His famous vision of the Valley of Dry Bones was meant to symbolize the regrouping and reconnection of the people of Israel back in their homeland. And to use his own words, "And ye shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and ye shall be my people, and I will be your God." The Singing Bible, Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 28, 30, 34, and 35.
Ye shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers.
His mercy endureth forever.
And ye shall be my people, and ye shall be my people, and I will be your God.
His mercy endureth forever.
I will multiply the fruit of the tree and the increase
The book of Daniel is a book with a split personality. It has 12 chapters, and the first 6 chapters are very different indeed from the second 6. Most of us are more familiar with the first part of the book. It's the storytelling part of Daniel. Daniel interpreting the king's dreams, Daniel escaping the lion's den, Daniel's friends surviving the fiery furnace. The second portion of Daniel is a series of prophecies. And like Ezekiel, Daniel specialized in apocalyptic prophecies. Now, most Old Testament prophets were relatively specific in their predictions. You know how it goes. Because the people of fill in the blank are sinners in the eyes of God, he will cause them to be conquered by fill in the blank. The prophecies of Daniel are not so specific. He talks about an unspecified time in the distant future, and his prophecies are filled with a number of symbols and visions which can be interpreted in many different ways. Also, unlike most of the other prophets in the Old Testament, Daniel tends to be a bit more on the optimistic side. His stress is on the vindication of God's people and their devotion to him, despite all the bad times that are happening and all that will happen. In the end, their devotion toward the Lord will be justified. In a number of instances, Daniel refers to the Lord as the Ancient of Days, and the song you're about to hear does likewise. The Singing Bible, Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. The final 12 books of the Old Testament are collectively known as the minor prophets. The word minor is no reflection on their religious significance, but merely on their length. Put together, the 12 books of the minor prophets are 67 chapters long, which is only one chapter more than the entire book of Isaiah. It would be nice if the 12 books were arranged in some kind of chronological order, like the earlier books of the Old Testament are, but they're not. And in order to understand what each prophet is talking about, you have to know at what time they lived relative to the two major dates in the history of the Hebrew kingdoms: the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC and the final conquest of the southern kingdom of Judah in 586 BC. The first of the minor prophets, Hosea, lived early on when both kingdoms still existed. And Hosea preached to the northern kingdom. He preached to the Israelites, and he warned them that their abandonment of the ways of God would soon cause them grief. And in doing so, he compared the unfaithfulness of the Israelites to the unfaithfulness of his own wife, Gomer, which must have been a kind of uncomfortable analogy to make. But he tempered his words of warning with some words of encouragement. Just as a marriage may not necessarily be destroyed by one act of unfaithfulness, so too did the Israelites have a chance of working their way back into the good graces of Jehovah. And that really is the central message of the book of Hosea, and it can be found in this song as well. The Singing Bible, Hosea chapter 6, verse 1, chapter 3, verse 3, and chapter 2, verses 16 and 21. Come back to me with all your heart. Don't let fear keep us apart. Trees do bend, though straight and tall, so must we to others call. Long have I waited for your coming home to me, and living deeply our new life. The wilderness will lead you to your heart, where I will speak. Integrity and justice with tenderness you shall know. Long have I waited for your coming home to me, and living deeply our new life. You shall sleep secure with peace. Faithfulness will be your joy. Long have I waited for your coming Long have I waited for your coming home to me, and living deeply our new life. The second of the 12 minor prophets in the Old Testament is the prophet Joel. I don't have a lot to say about the prophet Joel, but then neither does anyone else. Virtually nothing at all is known about him, not even when or where he lived. The best educated guess that biblical scholars have is that he might have lived around the time following the Babylonian exile, around the 5th century BC. Joel is a short book, about 3 chapters long. In it, the prophet talks about a terrible plague of locusts that has devastated the land, and he interprets that as God's retribution upon a sinful people. Joel calls upon the people to repent. If they do, he says, then the people's nation will be restored, the people's enemies will be judged, and most importantly, the land will be restored to fertility. So, fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord will do great things. The Singing Bible, Joel chapter 2, verse 21.
And this concludes Volume 2 of the Singing Bible. Volume 3 of our musical series will take us through the end of the Old Testament and beyond. I hope you have enjoyed this tape.